All right, we're back. So I went ahead and published the 20th. Good gracious. It's crazy to think that that's how many videos I have put out there in such a short time. But the 20th part of the series, the Rooted series, we're still going to finish part 19. It'll be like 19.1, point 2, point 3, what have you, to get through the rest of those subsections of history and dispute. Don't worry. We're just taking a detour. As you can see, the way that my brain works and the way things are not linear on this channel, okay? They're kind of all over the place. And you really just have to keep up, okay? To follow along. But, oh, there was something that I wanted to say. Hold on one second. Yes, because in the previous video I was speaking about how, those that I personally feel are more qualified to really be rendering care that is comprehensive, compassion filled, and competent are those who have dealt with a level of illness or, um, experience that is similar to the people or demographic that they're looking to serve or the issues that they're looking to address. Because I believe that if you haven't really had to navigate through what it means to attempt, because usually it's not something you ever really accomplish on the first try or first go, to treat any sort of, especially the modern illnesses of today that plague a lot of our people, unless you've experienced that, I don't know, that you can really, I don't know. I think it's just a different experience because there's a lot you can learn, like in a textbook, right? But translating what we read, what we learn through a lot of the text, even in this series, into real world application, into working knowledge and understanding are all different things. And then eventually, too, developing wisdom through experience and through failure, honestly, are very different phenomena of the process of learning. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot that can be learned and gleaned from people who may be dealing with things that you're not personally familiar with. And that doesn't mean that you can't become some sort of expert. But being that healing really is this sort of spiritual, intuitive type of process, I do think that there needs to be some level of experience, not with all diseases and imbalances and what crises, but with at least one. For, like you at least got to go through that part of the human experience and make it through or be managing it well enough to impart a level of wisdom and guidance that can be transformative into someone else's journey. It's like talking to someone who's never lost a parent. Yeah, they can probably sympathize to a degree. Yeah, they can understand a bit, depending again still on other life experiences and other things. But in my own experience too, and if you've lost a parent and you've experienced this, leave a comment below. But ultimately, they just don't get it. And it's like, they won't until, it happens to them. It'll happen to all of us. But, and God forbid, you pass before your parents. My aunt, actually, my cousin, during malpractice, brain surgery, which, is very risky in and of itself. But it wasn't the cause of that. It was surgeon error. She passed before my aunt. And yeah, just good gracious, the pain of having to outlive your child is something that cannot be articulated. And it's not something that anyone can really understand unless they've gone through it. And so I think the same is true in many cases with wellness and the illness aspect of that. The things that we're looking to address, unless you've gone through, and it doesn't have to be that specific condition or issue, but it would do you good to certainly, educate yourself and also speak to people who have gone through it. Because at the end of the day, it's someone understanding that experience firsthand that is going to rightly inform whatever care, can be rendered to address that. So that's kind of what I was, saying, and I just wanted to clear that up. But all right, let's get into the preface of this work. Again, this is Plants and Human Conflict by Aaron Pachersky. Iran Pachersky. All right, humans naturally relate to other animals more than they do to plants. Those of us who have taken formal biology classes know, at least on the intellectual level, that plants are living organisms just like animals are. But the majority of us now grow up in an urban environment, excuse me, y'all, and think about plants. I'm trying my best to read slow and clear because I really just want to. Anyway, and about plants mostly as food or as more or less inanimate objects in the landscape. There may be many reasons why people make a clear distinction between plants and animals, but I think it is fair to say that the majority of lay people consider the capacity to move to be the most important indicator of life. This visual sense is the dominant sense in the human species, and since animals clearly move around, they catch our attention. And we believe that history, events, can only be created by things that move around and intersect or interact with each other. And I do want to plug here really quick. As much as I hate the colonial stench on these videos and just on his work, we cannot deny the work. Just kind of is what it is. And I believe he passed recently, David Attenborough. He has a video on the plant kingdom. It was a series. Check it out because I think it was very fascinating and does a really great job at showcasing just how intricate the lives of plants really are and just how fascinating and amazing these organisms are. So check that out. Anyway, I grew up in Israel, a country located on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea. The area has been repeatedly impacted by major historical events for thousands of years, often being the locale where many powers from the ancient Egyptian kingdoms to the Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and which is like a combination of those, right? And Arab empires, and a few others, met each other, sometimes peacefully, but more often clashing violently. The modern state of Israel itself has had its share of violent conflicts, and it's interesting that he starts here as opposed to, the Israelites and the people who really should be the true inhabitants of the land. Anyway, the modern state of Israel itself has had its share of violent conflicts over its relatively short time of existence, so it is not surprising that since my early life, I have developed an interest in history in general and war history in particular. Because in all actuality, like, all of these fields coincide in some way or another. You can't escape it, And so I think it really profound that he's published a work to bridge the gap that acknowledges, the relationship between the plant kingdom and our experience with our environment and nature to the violence that we perpetuate amongst our species. Anyway, my interest in plants and their influence on human affairs developed more slowly. Until the age of 5, I lived on a communal farm known as a kibbutz, surrounded by wheat fields and orchids. The kibbutz was associated right on the border with the territory called the West Bank, then controlled by Jordan. Between the two countries was a 1 to 2 mile wide no man's land of perfectly good agricultural land that was going to waste because under the existing ceasefire agreement, the residents of neither Israel nor Jordan were allowed to cultivate it. When my family and I moved to the city, I used to take every opportunity I had, mostly during school vacations, to go back to the farm where some of my relatives still live. Nonetheless, until I was 18 years old, I generally led a typical life of a city boy in Israel in those days, going to school and after school, playing mostly in the streets. There were very few plants in my daily life in those days. All this changed when, after graduating from high school, I was conscripted into military service. Fortunately, I was given some choice in the kind of military unit that I could join. All right, take a sip of tea. And I decided to volunteer to an army unit that would train, or that trained. Let me make this bigger so y'all can. Oop, hold on, y'all. See a little better. That trained soldiers for ground combat, mostly in small groups. Israel has a relatively warm climate with temperatures rarely dipping below the freezing point, so plants, both wild and cultivated, grow year-round as long as water is available. Israel does have a diversity of microclimates ranging from alpine to desert, and with a corresponding diversity of native flora and fauna. My military training, and anyone who has served in the military knows that training, rather than fighting, is the major activity throughout one's service, involved being out in the country day and night, 7 days a week. We did a lot of marching from point A to point B, never using paved roads, but rather walking through cultivated fields, natural brush, forest, and desert, which, unlike the general impression of being barren, has a very rich and distinct flora as well as fauna. Yeah, it does. Once we arrived at our destination, we would practice attacking an imaginary enemy, which required us to intermittently crawl on the ground and then race from one natural shelter to another, all the while stepping on plants and hiding behind plants. Sometimes we actually pretend to be plants by camouflaging ourselves with uprooted vegetation or tree branches attached to our clothes and our helmets. I have strong visual memories of many plants that I encountered during the years I spent in the army, but my olfactory memories of this time are much, much stronger. I can still recall the distinct smells of plants permeating the air wherever I went, and the smell of the crushed plants as I stepped or crawled on them. Smell is the sense with the strongest emotional pull. I may not have been fully aware of it at the time, but in retrospect, I think that my close encounters with plants during my army years did lead me to change my original idea of studying mathematics in college, and instead pursue a lifelong career of studying plants. During this career, which began at the universities in California, then in New York, and for the last 30 years or so in Michigan, I'm telling y'all, it's a lifelong educational journey when you get into the world of plants, botany, all the things. Anyway, I've carried out research on the genetic and biochemical bases for the synthesis of many different compounds in plants, including odorous ones, as will be like essential oils and stuff. As will be detailed in the various chapters of the book, plants have evolved the ability to synthesize many more compounds than animals do, and these chemicals have served many functions in the plant. Again, they were here 3,000 or thousands of years prior to the creation of man on the seventh day. They may be basic building blocks of the plant cells and bodies. What are we creating on the seventh day? Hold on, y'all. Relax. Y'all already know how this goes. I'm going to be stopping and starting and interjecting. Hold on. No, the sixth day. That's right. Yeah, I'm tripping. Seventh day was a day of rest. All right. They may be basic building blocks of the plant cells and bodies, but they may also be scent and pigment chemicals that are found in flowers and fruit, and thus attract animals to visit the flowers and pollinate them, or eat the fruit and disperse the seeds away from the mother plant. And again, that's what that series by David Attenborough does a really great job at showing. Plant Kingdom series. Moreover, you can find it on YouTube. The twin facts that plants produce many compounds that animals cannot, yet animals need these chemicals for their own metabolism, make plants the targets of unwanted attention by animals that try and consume them. It is therefore not surprising that natural evolution has led to plants developing the ability to produce many toxic compounds that serve as a defense against animals and fungi and bacteria too. We'll kind of get into some mycology and stuff later. As I studied how plants make all these different compounds for their own needs, I became aware from reading general articles about such compounds that many of them have also been highly desired commodities for people. Some are, of course, the basic staples: starch, sugars, oils, right, polymonosaccharides, all the things, as well as additional essential nutrients such as vitamins that humans, like other animals, cannot make and therefore need to obtain from plants in order to survive. And you can also obtain through animal products as well. Some animals actually synthesize or assimilate certain vitamins and convert it in a way that is more bioaccessible for humans, which is why I do believe we were designed to, it's a circle of life. It's how God made it, to consume animals. It's just the way we've gone about it is a mess. I don't think that, and this is just my opinion, that veganism and vegetarianism and certain restrictive diets are sustainable in the long term for many people, especially people in our community. I think at some point or another, you're going to have to consume animals. I do. I believe that. And you could go without probably for decades, right, in your lifetime. But I don't know. I think at some point it's crucial, again, if we're looking to sort of have or acquire a certain level of health and wholeness. But that's just my opinion. But beyond the plant compounds, and it's because I know people in my personal life and others that I've observed who have enacted those kind of limiting and restrictive diets and have had, for health reasons, to incorporate animal proteins or just animal flesh products, whatever, of some sort. And so, yeah. But beyond the plant compounds that are necessary for subsistence, humans have had extensive use of plant material. Until recently, the vast majority of medicinal compounds came from plants, and even today, the majority of our medicines are either plant chemicals or modified plant chemicals such as aspirin and various opioid pain relievers. In addition, there are also plant-derived compounds that are used for making various items that are essential for advanced human society and culture. In this category, one finds rubber, which is today used for more than 40,000 different human artifacts. All right, I guess I could just take a sip. I'm kind of weird, though. Can y'all hear me sipping my tea? Instead of pausing all the time. And cellulose, which in its various manifestations is the basis for, among others, clothing, paper, and wood for house construction and furniture. Then there are many, and with like the talala trees or something, the latex that comes out of the bark as a liquid, that solidifies, and I'm sure it's like boiled and processed and cleansed and whatever, and maybe mixed with other things, but in its natural state, it's really fascinating to see like rubber, latex, all these things just naturally still be very similar to what they come, like the final product after adulteration. Then there are many plant compounds such as perfumes and flavors and mind-altering substances such as caffeine and alcohol that contribute to making our lives more pleasant and fun. I flipped those. What I also learned from pursuing my amateur interest in history, yeah, that's exactly, I love that. That is what I'm going to start using. Yes, I am an amateur in pursuit of my interest in history and the historical record. I am not a historian by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, is that plant chemicals have often been involved in violent human conflicts. This is not surprising. The tendency of people to try to obtain what they need and want by force is well known. I should also quickly add that I was certainly not the first one to realize it. Far from it. In fact, many excellent books have been published about specific plants that have been important to people at one time or another. I gotta find those books. Rubber, tea, and coffee trees, cotton, and spice plants. These and other plants have been celebrated for their contribution to human affairs, both for progress during peacetime and for their involvement in human warfare and conflict. And many of these studies are cited in this book. See, this is why I chew gum, because instead of having to like drink tea throughout all of this, keep everything how it need to be and lubricate it. So I can just keep going. Anyway, while I did I already read this? While I enjoyed reading books about how specific plants played a role in human history, I felt that somehow looking at one plant at a time misses an essential point. Moreover, this second point is really linked to the first. These books were typically written by historians, not plant biologists. So the actual attributes that made these plants essential to humans were described in general terms without much consideration of how such attributes evolved in the plants in the first place and how they serve the plants themselves. In other words, humans were always in the center of the story, using this plant or that, but the plants themselves are completely passive actors, not really alive. Very interesting. The more I thought about it, and the more I considered the lives of plants and the lives of humans separately, and as they intersected, I began to appreciate that placing humans at the center of the story is no more correct than placing planet Earth at the center of the universe. It is an understandable perspective for humans to employ, but one that ultimately misses the bigger picture. To see the bigger picture and to be able to deduce some basic rules that govern the interactions of plants and humans and the impacts of such interactions on both plants and humans, I think it necessary to combine the history of humans with the histories of many plants that we've interacted with, all in one story frame. Furthermore, combining these histories will also require combining the biological and historical viewpoints. This is what I've tried to achieve in this book. And being a biologist by training, as I gathered the histories of different plant species interactions with humans, I tried to infuse them with as much biological context as I found necessary and useful. A complete description of shared human plant history would be an enormous task, one that would be very difficult to achieve in a single book. The vastness of the topic might in fact make it more difficult to uncover the essential rules that govern such interactions. Yeah, because oh god, the intricacies of that is overwhelming to even think about. As for much internal deliberation, therefore, I chose to distill this task by focusing on the involvement of plants, specifically in human warfare and violent conflicts in general. I did so because I believe that it is during such events that the biological features of both plants and humans are more or most evidently in play. This book, therefore, recounts some of the most horrendous, albeit fascinating chapters in human history, many of which readers may be familiar with, but these events are recounted in somewhat unfamiliar ways by putting plants at the center of the story, or at least co-equal to the human actors, which is why I really appreciate this work. My goal in doing so was to achieve for myself and to convey to the readers a better understanding of both plant and human history. It is my hope that after reading this book, the reader will come away with the newly acquired recognition and appreciation that there is no human biology and history without plant biology and history, and at least for the domesticated plant species discussed in this book, the opposite is true as well. All right, we're going to jump in the next portion, which will be chapter 1. I did want to read a little bit more about Pechersky. Did I in this section? Nah, he kind of shared with us, more about himself in the preface, so that's cool. All right, we're going to jump into chapter 1, natural resources as causes of violent conflicts. So subscribe, like, share, and stay tuned.